Well, people aren't going to be energy pigs or energy gluttons as a general rule because energy isn't free. And so everyone is motivated to the degree that they can be motivated by reasonable energy pricing to be as effective and efficient as they possibly can be. And I suppose maybe you can produce a small increment in that efficiency by raising the price, but that doesn't strike me as a particularly good solution. So what did you see as promising on the alternative to fossil fuel front? Promising and credible.
So, right, and let me answer that question in the present day rather than in the 15 years ago when I was thinking hard about those things for BP. First of all, it's really hard to get rid of chemical fuels for transportation. If you think about a truck or a train, or a plane, you need the energy density that fossil fuels provide. We run our cars on gasoline, or in Europe in diesel. And we want to shift to electric. And I think that shift is slowly underway, though there are many barriers. But when you put the nozzle of the pump in your car, you're wielding about 10 megawatts of power. Whereas if we charge up the battery on an electric car, we're talking about 1/100th of the power flow. So it's really hard to beat the energy in chemical fuels. And so some fraction of the world is still going to run on chemical fuels. The fuels we use today emit carbon, fossil carbon, because we dig the oil out of the ground and use it to make gasoline, which then enters the atmosphere. We could make those fuels out of biological materials. And we've been doing that in the US by making corn ethanol, which is a phenomenally inefficient and not very environmentally friendly way of doing it. But there are other biological ways of getting carbon into fuel. And when I was in the Department of Energy and in BP, this intersection of biology and energy, making chemical fuels out of biological materials, was something we thought was very promising. We started a whole institute at Berkeley in Illinois to pursue that. I think it's still in the research and development stage, but if we're going to have transportation fuels for heavy transportation, then I think this biofuels is going to be very important.
Do you worry about the competition between cropland utilized for biofuels and food production, or are you thinking more about oceanic, like algae or algae?
No, algae doesn't. Algae is kind of tough, actually, for various technical reasons. We would grow things, but the idea was to use plants that do not compete for farmland, or to use the waste part of the food, the cellulose, rather than the carbohydrates.
And is there anything on that front that's viable, like commercial and at scale at the moment, or?
No, we can't do it. It's the cost, which is really the issue. You got to break down the cellulose, which is the structural material of the plants, into sugars and then ferment the sugars. And the cost right now is still 2 to 3 times what gasoline costs.
Okay, well, so we could say, and people do say, well, damn the cost, that it's real costly if the planet burns up in 100 years. And so why not just force people to, or require or incentivize people to, pay 3 or 4 times as much for their energy usage now?
Well, I think, as we've seen in France and other places, when you try to do that, people get very upset. And in fact, there's tremendous disruption. And in fact, this whole energy transition that we're talking about, if you do it too rapidly, it's tremendously disruptive, because energy touches every part of our lives. And so you got to go slow. There is no climate crisis. We can get onto that in a bit. Let us take our time, develop the technologies, introduce them, gracefully and eventually reduce emissions as required.
Yeah, well, that graceful introduction doesn't seem to me to be something that can be managed from a top-down perspective very straightforwardly. I mean, first of all, we're seeing a tremendous amount of instability on the energy provision front in Europe at the moment, partly because of winter, partly because of the war, partly because of, I would say, clueless, hypothetically environmentally oriented policies in the past. And so let me lay out a couple of the problems I see with renewables and tell me what you think about that, okay? So, well, the first is that obviously, and this has really been a problem in the UK recently, you don't get a lot of electricity when the wind isn't blowing and the sun isn't shining. And we've had prolonged periods of wind drought in the winter in the UK, and that's a real catastrophe. We hear a lot of noise about the cost, benefit, and effectiveness of renewables, but the cost of renewable energy on the wind and solar front is generally estimated at the cost when the wind is blowing and the sun is shining, not when it's dark and there's no wind at all, because the price actually moves towards the infinite at that point. Now, the problem technically, as far as I can tell, apart from whatever environmental damage wind and solar might be producing in and of themselves, like the death of birds and bats, for example, the big problem seems to me to be twofold. One is that they're cyclic on a daily basis and a weekly basis and a monthly basis, and we don't have good storage, and it isn't obvious we're going to have it soon. And storage itself, everything that needs to be mined and so forth to make batteries, has a non-negligible environmental cost.
So it doesn't have to be storage. So let me back up for a second. Okay. So we're on the electrical grid now, and we would like our grid to have three qualities. First of all, it should be reliable. The reliability standard in North America is like 1 day out of a decade that the bulk power system should go down. The second is we would like it to be affordable. If electricity prices get too high, it's a terrible disruption. And the third thing is we'd like it to be clean, both in a local pollution sense, but also in a CO2 emission sense. So reliable, affordable, and clean. We have a reliable and affordable system based on coal and natural gas. You can be reliable and clean if you do nuclear energy or you do carbon capture and storage with gas or coal. Or you can be affordable and clean with wind and solar, but you can't have all three. The most expensive part of a useful grid is the reliability. It's not the wind and solar. And because you can have up to a month's worth of Dunkelflaute, where the wind and solar are not producing at all, the backup system, whatever it is, needs to be at least as capable as the wind and solar system, which means the cost is going to be at least double because wind and solar are the cheapest. All right? So, and people have done detailed studies using real weather data and cost for wind and solar and nuclear or batteries and so on. And it turns out that we're going to at least double, if not triple, the cost of electricity if we go to a renewable heavy grid. And I don't think that's a very good thing at all.
Well,
wind and solar can be a supplement to an existing grid, but they can never be the backbone.